If you were forced to witness an act of pure cruelty, would you turn away, or would you fight to make it right? Prepare yourself for a deeply moving story of resilience, courage, and the unbreakable bond between humans and animals. What you're about to hear might break your heart, but I promise it will also remind you of the extraordinary capacity for compassion that exists in our world. On a sweltering summer afternoon in the dusty outskirts of Tucson, Arizona, the air shimmered with heat as traffic crawled along Route 86. Among the vehicles was a rusty blue pickup truck driven by Jackson Reed, a retired Marine with weathered features and eyes that had seen more suffering than most. Beside him sat his teenage daughter Ellie, headphones in, gaze fixed on the desert landscape stretching endlessly beyond her window. Neither of them could have anticipated how their lives would change when they spotted a flash of movement on the horizon. A motorcycle speeding recklessly, leaving behind a trail of dust and something else. Something that made Jackson's battle-hardened heart freeze in his chest. A small golden-brown dog, tied by its neck to the back of the motorcycle, desperately trying to keep pace as its paws scraped raw against the blistering asphalt. This dog, a mixed breed with soulful amber eyes and a spirit that refused to break, would come to be known as Rusty. Before this moment, Rusty had lived a life of neglect at the hands of Troy Winters, a man whose capacity for cruelty was matched only by his indifference to suffering. The scars across Rusty's thin frame told a story of persistent abuse, yet somehow his gentle nature remained intact beneath layers of fear and pain. Just a mile behind Jackson's truck rumbled the motorcycles of the Desert Guardians, a motorcycle club with a fearsome reputation but a little-known mission of protecting the vulnerable in their community. Led by their president, Vanessa Steele Rodriguez, the group of 15 riders was returning from a charity run when they too witnessed the horrifying scene unfolding ahead of them on the highway. Rusty had been Troy's unwanted burden for 3 years, a dog acquired on a drunken whim and subjected to escalating cruelty as Troy's personal life disintegrated around him. Today was simply the culmination of that cruelty, Troy's final act of violence against the one creature that had only ever offered him loyalty, despite receiving nothing but pain in return. The Arizona sun beat down mercilessly as Rusty struggled to maintain his footing, lungs burning and paws leaving smears of blood on the scorching pavement. Each desperate stride was a testament to his will to survive, even as the rope around his neck tightened with every falter in his step. His world had narrowed to the simple, primal need to keep running, keep breathing, despite the searing pain coursing through his body. In the pickup truck, 16-year-old Ellie Reed dropped her phone as she registered what her father had seen seconds before. "Dad, that dog!" The words caught in her throat as horror washed over her. Ellie, who volunteered weekends at the local animal shelter, felt a visceral rage building inside her chest as she watched the suffering animal being dragged along the highway. Jackson's knuckles turned white on the steering wheel as memories of his own service dog from his military days flooded back. Chief, who had pulled him through the darkest days after his deployment. The thought of anyone treating an animal with such callous disregard ignited something primal within him. Without hesitation, he slammed on the accelerator, his truck lurching forward in pursuit of the motorcycle. Meanwhile, Steele raised her fist in the air, the signal for her club to form their emergency pursuit formation. The thunderous roar of 15 Harleys intensified as the Desert Guardians accelerated as one unit, their leather cuts emblazoned with their club insignia flapping in the wind. Though often misjudged by their appearance, this was a group united by a code that valued justice and protection of the innocent above all else. Among the Desert Guardians rode Dr. Imani Watson, a veterinarian who dedicated her off hours to animal rescue operations with the club. Through her helmet visor, she assessed Rusty's condition with professional detachment that barely contained her fury. She could see the dog beginning to stumble, his strength fading with each passing second. They had minutes, perhaps seconds, before the animal would collapse completely. The cruel spectacle had attracted the attention of other motorists now, some honking in outrage, others pulling over in shock. Troy seemed oblivious or indifferent to the commotion behind him, focused only on his reckless speed and whatever dark destination awaited him. The rope trailing behind his motorcycle was just another extension of his casual brutality, the suffering of the animal at its end merely background noise to the chaos of his own making. As Jackson's truck gained ground, Ellie frantically dialed 911, her voice breaking as she reported what they were witnessing. "Please hurry," she begged the dispatcher. "He's killing this dog right in front of everyone." Her free hand pressed against the window, as if she could somehow reach through the glass and scoop the suffering animal to safety through sheer force of will. Behind them, the Desert Guardians had formed a protective arrow formation, creating a corridor that cut through traffic with practiced precision. Their presence on the road was commanding, their purpose clear in every controlled maneuver. This was no ordinary chase. This was a rescue mission, and every rider understood the stakes with absolute clarity. Rusty's legs gave out for a terrifying moment, his body briefly dragging directly against the abrasive asphalt before instinct forced him back to his feet. The sudden jerk caused the rope to tighten viciously around his neck, cutting off his air supply for precious seconds. Blood now matted his golden-brown fur, and his tongue lolled from his mouth as dehydration and exhaustion waged war against his survival instinct. Despite everything, a spark remained in those amber eyes, a desperate, primal will to live that refused to be extinguished. Troy glanced back briefly, his face twisted in a grotesque smirk when he saw the dog still struggling to keep pace. Something about the animal's refusal to give up seemed to infuriate him further, as if Rusty's resilience was a personal affront. He deliberately swerved the motorcycle, causing Rusty to stumble across the rough shoulder of the road, where broken glass and debris lay scattered. The casual cruelty of the act was chilling. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment, but a sustained, deliberate torture. In Jackson's truck, Ellie had moved from horror to a focused rage that reminded her father of his own combat intensity. "Dad, they're going to exit soon. Take the cutoff," she shouted, recognizing the route as Troy began signaling for the upcoming exit. Jackson nodded grimly, his military training kicking in as he calculated angles and timing. If they could get ahead of Troy somehow, cut him off at the exit ramp, they might be able to force him to stop before Rusty suffered anymore. Steele communicated rapidly with her club through their helmet intercoms, directing 3 riders to split off and circle around to the exit ahead. "Hawk, Diesel, Monarch, cut him off at the pass," she commanded, using their road names with practiced efficiency. "Doc, stay central. We'll need you the second we stop this bastard." "Doctor, I'm Arnie Watson," known as Doc on the road, acknowledged with a terse "copy that," already mentally cataloguing the emergency supplies in her saddlebags and the likely injuries she would need to treat. The Desert Guardians weren't strangers to rescuing animals in distress. It had become an unofficial part of their club mission over the years. What had started as a group of motorcycle enthusiasts with checkered pasts had evolved into a tight-knit community that protected the vulnerable in ways law enforcement often couldn't or wouldn't. Many of them had found redemption through this work, channeling their own histories of violence and trauma into a force for good. But even for the hardened riders, the sight of Rusty's suffering tested the limits of their emotional control. Troy's motorcycle began to slow slightly as it approached the exit ramp, giving Rusty a momentary reprieve that allowed the dog to catch his breath. The rope had rubbed his neck raw, creating a collar of exposed flesh that bled freely with each movement. His paws were shredded from the pavement, leaving bloody prints on the road behind him. Yet in that brief pause, Rusty's eyes caught Ellie's through the truck window, and something passed between them, a silent plea that pierced the teenager's heart like an arrow. Jackson spotted an opportunity as traffic condensed near the exit and executed a daring maneuver, cutting across 2 lanes to position his truck alongside the motorcycle. "Hold on," he warned Ellie as he edged closer to Troy's bike, trying to force the man toward the shoulder, without causing a crash that would further injure the dog. His years of tactical driving in combat zones served him well now, as he calculated each move with precision, his focus absolute despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. Troy noticed the encroaching truck and reacted with unexpected violence, pulling a handgun from his waistband and waving it threateningly toward Jackson's window. The sight of the weapon caused Jackson to swerve slightly, giving Troy just enough space to accelerate ahead onto the exit ramp. The sudden burst of speed caught Rusty off guard, pulling him off his feet again and dragging him helplessly as the motorcycle rounded the curve of the exit ramp. Ellie's scream tore through the cab of the truck as she witnessed Rusty's body bouncing against the concrete barrier. "He's not going to make it, Dad," she sobbed, pressing her hands against the window in helpless anguish. Jackson's jaw tightened as he pushed the truck to its limits, following Troy down the ramp while simultaneously scanning for the desert guardians in his mirrors. Help was coming, but would it be soon enough? The three Guardian riders who had split off were now converging on the exit from different directions, having used their knowledge of local roads to position themselves strategically. Hawk, a former army ranger with tattoos covering his massive arms, reached the bottom of the ramp first, deliberately sliding his Harley sideways to create a barrier across the road. Behind him, Diesel and Monarch flanked into defensive positions, forming a human roadblock that forced Troy to skid to an abrupt halt. The sudden stop sent Troy tumbling from his motorcycle, but not before he yanked cruelly on the rope still attached to Rusty. The dog's body slid forward on momentum, colliding with the fallen motorcycle with a sickening thud. For one heart-stopping moment, Rusty lay completely still on the asphalt, his bloodied body motionless under the scorching Arizona sun. The silence that followed seemed to stretch into infinity as all eyes fixed on the small, broken figure on the ground. Troy scrambled to his feet, gun still in hand, his face contorted with rage and fear as he found himself surrounded. Jackson's truck screeched to a halt nearby, and Ellie burst from the passenger door before her father could stop her, running toward Rusty with no thought for her own safety. "Ellie, no!" Jackson shouted, reaching for his daughter as Troy swung the gun wildly between the bikers and the approaching teenager. Steele and the remaining Guardians arrived seconds later, the thunder of their engines announcing their presence like cavalry charging into battle. They circled Troy in a tightening formation, a wall of leather and chrome that left him no escape route. The club members dismounted with fluid precision, their movements coordinated through years of riding together. Despite their imposing appearance, tattoos, leather, and stern expressions, there was something almost ceremonial in how they positioned themselves, like knights forming a protective circle around the fallen. Dr. Imani Watson pushed through the human barrier, medical bag already in hand, as she dropped to her knees beside Rusty's still form. Her fingers gently pressed against his ribcage, searching for signs of life, while Ellie hovered nearby, tears streaming down her face. "Please," the teenager whispered, the single word containing a universe of desperate hope. The veterinarian's face revealed nothing as she worked, her professional demeanor a mask that concealed the rage and sorrow churning inside her. Meanwhile, Troy found himself face to face with Steele, whose 5'10" frame seemed to tower over him through sheer force of presence. "Drop the gun," she commanded, her voice deadly quiet, yet somehow carrying over the idling motorcycles. When Troy hesitated, Steele took a single step forward, her eyes never leaving his. "That wasn't a request," she said, and something in her expression, the absolute certainty that she would prevail, made Troy's hand tremble. The gun clattered to the ground as the wail of approaching police sirens finally pierced the tension-filled air. Under Dr. Imani's skilled hands, Rusty's chest suddenly rose with a shallow, shuddering breath that seemed to release the collective tension in the air. "He's alive," she announced, her professional composure cracking just enough to reveal the emotion beneath. "But we need to move fast." The veterinarian's fingers worked deftly to loosen the cruel rope around Rusty's neck, revealing raw, bleeding flesh beneath his matted fur. Each gentle touch was a stark contrast to the brutality the dog had endured, a silent promise that the worst was now behind him. Ellie knelt beside Rusty, her tears falling onto his battered body as she whispered reassurances that seemed as much for herself as for the injured animal. "You're safe now, boy. You made it. You're so brave." Her voice broke on the last word, overwhelmed by the miracle of the dog's survival against such impossible odds. Something profound had awakened in the teenager, a fierce protectiveness that transformed her from witness to guardian in the space of a heartbeat. Jackson approached Troy, who now sat handcuffed on the curb as local police officers processed the scene. The retired Marine's military bearing was evident in his rigid posture and controlled movements, but the look in his eyes as he stared down at Troy contained something far more primal than military discipline. "You better pray that dog makes it," he said quietly, each word precise and heavy with unspoken threat. Troy finally looked away, unable to maintain eye contact with the intensity radiating from Jackson. Steele conferred briefly with the police officers, her demeanor shifting from avenging warrior to respected community leader as she provided a detailed statement of what they had witnessed. The Desert Guardians had cultivated a surprising relationship with local law enforcement over the years, their animal rescue work and charity events gradually earning them respect despite their intimidating appearance. "We need an escort to the emergency vet clinic on Speedway," she explained to the senior officer, gesturing toward where Dr. Imani was now carefully splinting Rusty's broken leg. Dr. Imani worked with focused intensity, administering emergency pain medication and fluids while assessing Rusty's injuries, multiple lacerations, dehydration, probable internal bleeding, broken right front leg, and significant trauma to the neck and trachea. She reported to no one in particular, her clinical assessment at odds with the gentle way she stroked Rusty's head between procedures. The dog's eyes remained closed, but his breathing had stabilized somewhat under her care. "We need transport now if he's going to have a chance." Without hesitation, Hawk stepped forward and removed his prized leather cut, the vest bearing the Desert Guardian's insignia that no member ever willingly parted with. With surprising tenderness, the massive, tattooed man laid it across Rusty's trembling body like a blanket. "For shock," he explained gruffly when he noticed Ellie's questioning look. "And so he knows he's one of us now. No guardian fights alone." The simple gesture carried such weight that several of the hardened bikers turned away, momentarily overcome. A police cruiser cleared the way as the unusual procession headed toward the veterinary emergency clinic. Dr. Imani, in the back of Jackson's truck, cradling Rusty, with Ellie beside her holding an IV bag aloft, and the Desert Guardians providing escort, their motorcycles forming a protective phalanx around the pickup. The sight drew stares from passers-by, this unexpected alliance of a military veteran, a teenage girl and leather-clad bikers united in their desperate mission to save one small, broken dog. Inside the truck, Rusty briefly opened his eyes, his gaze meeting Ellie's with such profound trust that the girl felt something permanent shift within her heart. Despite his grievous injuries, the dog weakly lifted his head toward her hand, seeking connection even through his pain. Imani observed the interaction with knowing eyes. "He understands he's being helped," she said softly. "Dogs have an incredible capacity for forgiveness. Even after everything, he's still looking for connection, not revenge." At the emergency clinic, a team of veterinary professionals waited. Alerted by the police escort of the incoming trauma case, Rusty was rushed inside on a stretcher, his small body dwarfed by the urgency surrounding him. The clinic director, Dr. Preston, took charge immediately, directing Rusty toward the surgical suite while rattling off orders to his staff. "IV fluids wide open, blood work stat, prepare for emergency surgery. This is now our only priority case." Ellie collapsed into her father's arms in the waiting room, the adrenaline that had sustained her finally giving way to exhaustion and delayed shock. Around them, the Desert Guardians filled the small space, their imposing presence transformed into something almost parental as they formed a protective circle around the distraught teenager. Steele pulled Dr. Imani aside, her voice low and urgent. "What are his real chances? Don't sugarcoat it for me." Dr. Imani's expression was grim as she removed her blood-stained gloves. "Honestly, it could go either way. The external injuries we can fix, but the internal damage, the trauma to his system from being dragged like that." She shook her head slightly. "The next few hours will tell us if he has the strength left to fight. He's lost a lot of blood, and his body has been through extreme trauma. But I've seen miraculous recoveries before. Some animals just have a spirit that refuses to quit." As the hours of surgery stretched on, a remarkable thing began to happen in the waiting room. What had begun as a chance encounter between strangers evolved into something deeper. Jackson shared stories from his military days, including how his service dog, Chief, had saved him from suicide after his return from combat. Steele revealed that the Desert Guardian's animal rescue mission had begun when she found an abandoned pit bull fighting ring and vowed to protect the vulnerable creatures others had failed. Ellie listened in wonder as these seemingly different worlds revealed unexpected commonalities. The waiting room door finally opened around midnight, and Dr. Preston emerged, surgical cap still on his head, and exhaustion evident in his stance. The room fell silent immediately, all eyes fixed on the veterinarian's face, searching for clues before he spoke. "We've stabilized him," he announced, allowing himself a small smile as the tension in the room broke with audible sighs of relief. "He's not out of the woods yet, and recovery will be long, but he survived the surgery." He's a fighter, that one. But the true turning point came just before dawn, when Dr. Preston allowed Ellie a brief visit to the recovery area. Rusty lay on a padded bed, connected to monitors and IV lines, his body heavily bandaged, but his chest rising and falling with steady rhythm. As Ellie approached, speaking softly to announce her presence, Rusty's tail moved in a weak but unmistakable wag. The simple gesture, this injured animal still able to express joy despite everything, broke something open inside Ellie, a floodgate of emotion that left her sobbing beside the recovery kennel. "I think he's chosen you," Dr. Preston observed quietly, watching the interaction between girl and dog with knowing eyes. "Sometimes these things happen for a reason we can't understand. He's going to need someone special for his rehabilitation, someone patient enough to help him trust again." The veterinarian paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "Would you and your father consider taking him once he's recovered enough to leave our care? I think it would benefit his healing tremendously to be with someone he's already bonded with." 3 weeks after the horrific incident on Route 86, Rusty lay on a plush dog bed in the corner of the Reed family living room, his body still marked by healing wounds, but his eyes brighter with each passing day. The road to recovery stretched before him, mapped out in a detailed care plan taped to the refrigerator door. Physical therapy exercises, medication schedules, and specialized feeding instructions that Ellie followed with religious dedication. Though still unable to put weight on his casted front leg, Rusty lifted his head expectantly whenever Ellie entered the room, his tail thumping against the cushions in a rhythm that had become the heartbeat of their household. Jackson watched from the doorway as his daughter gently massaged the scar tissue on Rusty's neck, applying a healing salve Dr. Imani had specially formulated for the rope burns. The tenderness in Ellie's movements, the soft words of encouragement she whispered to Rusty, reminded Jackson powerfully of the combat medics he'd served alongside, that same mix of focus and compassion that somehow brought healing to more than just physical wounds. In just 3 weeks, he had witnessed a transformation in his daughter, a newfound purpose that straightened her spine and kindled a steadiness in her eyes. The court case against Troy Winters had proceeded with unusual speed, propelled by public outrage after a bystander's video of Rusty being dragged went viral. Steele and the Desert Guardians had attended every hearing in silent solidarity, their presence in the courtroom a visual reminder of the community's demand for justice. But it was Ellie's testimony that had proven most devastating, her clear-eyed description of Rusty's suffering, delivered with a composure that belied her 16 years. When the judge sentenced Troy to the maximum penalty for animal cruelty and banned him from ever owning animals again, the teenager had stood tall, receiving the verdict with a dignity that made Jackson's chest swell with pride. Dr. Imani visited weekly to check on Rusty's progress, her professional assessments gradually shifting from cautious optimism to genuine excitement. "His resilience is remarkable," she observed during her most recent visit, watching as Rusty tentatively put slight weight on his healing leg for the first time. "The damaged tissue in his throat is healing better than I expected, and his blood work shows significant improvement in kidney function." She paused, meeting Ellie's hopeful gaze with warm certainty. "He's not just surviving anymore, Ellie, he's healing. There's a difference." The Reed home had become an unexpected gathering place for the Desert Guardians, who arrived in small groups bearing homemade dog treats, specialized therapy equipment, and an endless supply of stories and laughter. Hawk, whose imposing physical presence had initially terrified the neighbors, now spent Saturday afternoons sitting cross-legged on the floor beside Rusty's bed, reading aloud from a dog training manual in his deep, rumbling voice. "Dogs understand more than just words," he explained seriously when Jackson questioned this practice. "They understand intention and consistency. He needs to know the world makes sense again." 6 weeks after the surgery, Rusty took his first unassisted steps across the living room floor, his movements cautious but determined as he navigated from his bed to where Ellie sat on the couch. The simple journey, no more than 10 feet in distance, represented a victory so profound that Ellie called every person on their growing contact list to share the news. That night, the Desert Guardians arrived with a custom leather collar for Rusty, butter-soft and hand-tooled with his name and the club's insignia. "He's earned his colors," Steele announced as Hawk ceremoniously fastened it around Rusty's neck, replacing the medical collar he'd worn since the hospital. As physical healing progressed, the emotional scars began to show themselves in unexpected ways. Rusty still cowered at sudden movements, still trembled at the sound of motorcycles passing the house, still woke sometimes in the night with whimpers that broke Ellie's heart. But where there had once been only fear, new reactions emerged alongside it. Trust when Jackson approached with outstretched hands, curiosity when a new guardian visited the house, and most miraculously, joy when Ellie returned home from school each day, his entire body wiggling with excitement, despite the lingering pain this surely caused. The local media had followed Rusty's story with devoted attention, regular updates on his recovery appearing in newspapers and on television. What had begun as a horrific tale of cruelty had transformed into something else entirely. A story about community, about unexpected alliances formed in moments of crisis, about the healing power of purpose. When a local reporter asked Ellie what she had learned from the experience, her answer was simple but profound. "I learned that sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best changes, but only if you're brave enough to step in when it matters." Dr. Preston had suggested animal-assisted therapy as part of Rusty's psychological recovery, the concept that helping others could help heal Rusty's own trauma. At first, Jackson had been skeptical, concerned that exposing Rusty to strangers might trigger his anxiety. But when they brought Rusty to the Veterans Rehabilitation Center, where Jackson received his own therapy, something remarkable happened. The dog, who still sometimes flinched at sudden movements, approached a wheelchair-bound veteran with gentle, deliberate calm, resting his head on the man's knee with such intuitive understanding that several staff members were moved to tears. By the 3-month mark, Rusty's physical recovery had progressed beyond the most optimistic projections. The limp remained, and would likely always be a part of him, but his energy had returned in full force, enough that Ellie now took him for daily walks in the desert preserve behind their house, where his golden-brown fur caught the sunlight as he investigated cactus and quail with newfound confidence. Dr. Imani had cleared him for longer excursions, expressing amazement at how completely his body had mended itself. "Some animals just have an exceptional will to heal," she explained. "And having a purpose doesn't hurt either." That purpose became increasingly clear as Rusty began accompanying Ellie to her volunteer shifts at the animal shelter, where his gentle presence had a calming effect on the most traumatized rescues. The shelter director noticed this effect immediately and suggested a more formal role for the remarkable dog. "He connects with the animals we haven't been able to reach," she explained to Jackson and Ellie. "He tells them it's safe here, in a language only they understand." The proud set of Rusty's ears when wearing his helper bandana suggested he understood the importance of his new job perfectly well. The Desert Guardians had expanded their animal rescue operations in the months following Rusty's recovery. Inspired by the community response to his story, Steele approached Jackson one evening as the sunset painted the desert sky in brilliant orange. "We're setting up a dedicated rescue transport team," she explained, watching as Rusty dozed peacefully at Ellie's feet nearby. "For animals in emergency situations, when minutes count. We'd like to name it after him, the Rusty Response Team." The simple acknowledgement that this once broken dog had catalyzed something larger than himself brought unexpected tears to Jackson's eyes. On the 6-month anniversary of Rusty's rescue, the Reed family hosted a celebration in their backyard that united the unlikely community that had formed around the healing dog. Veterinarians stood chatting with bikers, shelter volunteers shared food with police officers, and at the center of it all was Rusty, moving confidently between groups, accepting gentle pets and treats with dignified appreciation. The physical scars remained visible on his body, permanent reminders of what he had endured, but they had faded to silver lines, nearly hidden beneath his now glossy coat, no longer defining him. Ellie had prepared a short speech for the occasion, standing nervously before the gathered crowd with Rusty sitting proudly at her side. "6 months ago, I thought we were saving Rusty," she began, her hand resting lightly on the dog's head. "But the truth is, he saved something in all of us too. He showed us that survival isn't just about being strong enough to endure the bad things that happen. It's about being brave enough to trust again afterward." Round her, heads nodded in silent understanding, each person reflecting on the unexpected ways this single dog had touched their lives. As twilight deepened into evening, Jackson found himself sitting alone with Rusty on the porch steps, the sounds of conversation and laughter drifting from the backyard behind them. The dog leaned against his side with comfortable familiarity, his breath warm and steady in the cooling desert air. "You changed my daughter's life," Jackson said quietly, scratching behind Rusty's ears. "She's talking about veterinary school now. Says she wants to help animals like you." Rusty looked up at him with those amber eyes that had seen both the worst and best of humanity, and Jackson could have sworn he saw understanding there, a wisdom earned through suffering and healing that transcended species. 1 year after that fateful day on Route 86, Rusty stood at the top of a gentle hill in the desert preserve, his head lifted to catch the breeze that carried 1,000 wild scents across the landscape. The physical reminders of his trauma had faded. His fur had grown back thicker and more golden where it had once been torn away, and though he would always favor his right front leg slightly, he moved with a confidence that belied his history. The most remarkable transformation, however, was visible in his eyes. Where fear and pain had once dwelled, there now shone a serene trust, a living testament to the healing power of compassion consistently applied. Below him on the trail, Ellie chatted with Steele and Dr. Imani, the three unlikely friends planning the upcoming anniversary fundraiser for the Rusty Response Team, which had already saved 37 animals from emergency situations across the county. Ellie's college applications sat completed on her desk at home, each personal essay eloquently describing how a single dog had redirected her life's purpose toward veterinary medicine. The shelter director had written her a glowing recommendation, noting that Ellie possessed that rare combination of technical aptitude and emotional intelligence that defined the best animal healers. Jackson watched Rusty surveying his domain from the hilltop, marveling at how thoroughly this animal had woven himself into the fabric of their lives. What had begun as an instinctive rescue had evolved into a profound bond that strengthened his relationship with Ellie and extended their family into the wider community. The Desert Guardians had become regular fixtures in their lives, no longer an intimidating presence but trusted allies who showed up reliably, for Sunday barbecues and emergency home repairs alike. The retired Marine found unexpected peace in this new tribe, their code of loyalty and protection aligning with values he'd carried since his service days. From his vantage point, Rusty suddenly tensed, his attention locked on something moving through the scrub brush ahead. For one heart-stopping moment, Jackson feared a trauma response, a flashback to the violence that had nearly claimed the dog's life. But Rusty's posture wasn't fearful. It was focused, alert, purposeful. With deliberate movements, he descended from his perch and approached a clump of brittle desert vegetation, nose working intently. A moment later, he gently pulled back the brush with his paw to reveal a tiny, trembling cottontail rabbit, its leg clearly broken, and its breathing rapid with fear. What happened next brought tears to Jackson's eyes. Rusty, who had every reason to mistrust the world, to protect himself above all else, lay down at a respectful distance from the injured creature, his body language deliberately non-threatening. He looked back at Ellie and gave a single soft whine, the special sound he had developed to alert her to animals in distress during their shelter work. The rabbit remained frozen, but something in Rusty's patient presence seemed to communicate safety, his own history of trauma and healing somehow evident in the gentle way he held himself, neither advancing nor retreating, simply bearing witness until help could arrive. As Ellie carefully collected the injured rabbit for transport to the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, Jackson reflected on the profound message contained in that simple interaction. Rusty had transformed his suffering into a unique form of empathy. He recognized pain in others because he had experienced it himself, and rather than turning away, he moved toward it with purposeful compassion. There was a lesson there that transcended species, a reminder that our deepest wounds, when properly healed, can become our greatest sources of connection and understanding. Later that evening, as stars appeared above the desert landscape, the Reed living room hosted an impromptu gathering of desert guardians, shelter volunteers, and local veterinary staff, the community that had formed around Rusty's recovery and continued to grow through their shared mission. Conversations flowed easily between people who might never have connected without the golden dog who now moved confidently from person to person, accepting affection as his due. The injured rabbit, now stabilized at the Wildlife Center with a good prognosis, had become the latest chapter in the ongoing story that had begun a year ago on that highway. "You know what amazes me most?" Dr. Imani remarked to Jackson as they watched Rusty gently guiding a timid shelter puppy through the basics of human interaction. When to approach, when to retreat, how to read the subtle signals of safe people. It's not just that he survived, it's that he didn't just heal enough to function. He healed enough to thrive, to give back, to connect. That's extraordinarily rare after the kind of trauma he experienced. She smiled as Rusty demonstrated perfect patience with the puppy's clumsy attempts at play. He refused to let cruelty define him. Perhaps this is the miracle we all seek in our own lives. Not simply to endure our suffering, but to move through it toward a place where our wounds become wisdom, where our scars tell stories of resilience rather than defeat. Rusty's journey from victim to healer, from broken to whole, reminds us that the darkest moments need not determine our ultimate destination. His story resonates because it reflects our deepest human hope, that even after unimaginable cruelty, recovery is possible. Not just recovery, but transformation. The legacy of that terrible day continues to ripple outward in expanding circles of impact. The Rusty Response Team now partners with law enforcement agencies across 3 counties, providing emergency transport and medical care for animals in crisis situations. The Desert Guardians have received community service awards, their fearsome reputation transformed into respected partnership with official agencies. Most importantly, dozens of animals who might otherwise have been lost now share their own stories of recovery in loving homes, each one carrying forward Rusty's legacy of resilience and second chances. As you reflect on Rusty's journey from the edge of death to a life filled with purpose and connection, consider the broken places in your own heart, the injuries that seem too profound to fully heal. Remember that recovery isn't a straight line but a spiral, moving sometimes closer, sometimes further, but always ultimately forward if we allow ourselves to be guided by compassion rather than fear. Just as Rusty found his way back from unimaginable trauma through the consistent care of committed allies, perhaps our own healing depends not just on personal strength, but on our willingness to let others walk beside us through the darkest valleys.